Hours after United States Central Command said its attacks on Iran had officially ended for the night, something else happened that nobody had announced in advance. A local official in southern Iran confirmed that a U.S. airstrike had hit the perimeter of the Bushehr Nuclear Power Plant. Not a missile site, not a radar station. The perimeter of an active nuclear facility struck sometime around 4:30 in the morning, hours after the operation was supposed to already be over. Nobody at the Pentagon responded immediately when Iranian state media accused the United States of a grave war crime. And by the time the sun came up over the Gulf, Iran's health ministry released a number that made this entire round of fighting feel different from everything that came before it. 14 people dead, 78 wounded. The first official casualty count either side had released in this specific exchange, and it landed on the same day Iran was preparing to bury its own supreme leader. To understand how the world got to a nuclear plant's perimeter being struck and a death toll being announced within the same 24 hours, you have to go back to a single sentence President Trump said out loud on a stage in Turkey. Every time they hit us, we hit them 20. That's not a policy statement. That's closer to a threat delivered as arithmetic, and it turned out to be almost literal. Central Command confirmed its forces struck approximately 90 separate Iranian military targets, hitting air defense systems, coastal surveillance networks, missile and drone storage facilities, naval capabilities, and logistics infrastructure strung along Iran's entire southern coastline. 90 targets, in response to 3 tankers being hit 2 days earlier. The math Trump described out loud on that stage wasn't an exaggeration. It was roughly what actually happened. To put 90 targets into some kind of perspective, that's not a handful of missile batteries hit in a single strike package. That's an operation large enough to require sustained coordination across multiple branches of the military, over more than one day, hitting infrastructure spread across an entire coastline hundreds of miles long. Compare that to the strikes carried out just 11 days earlier, when the U.S. hit roughly 80 targets in response to the first wave of tanker attacks, and you start to see the shape of an escalating pattern rather than a one-time event. Each round has been larger than the one before it, and each one has come faster on the heels of the last provocation than the round before. The spark, as it had been so many times over the past several months, was the Strait of Hormuz. On Tuesday, Iran struck multiple commercial vessels moving through or near the strait, the same narrow channel that carried roughly a fifth of the world's oil before this war began. Within hours, the United States revoked the sanctions waiver on Iranian oil exports, a waiver that had only existed because of the ceasefire deal signed last month. Then came the retaliatory strikes, dozens at first, and then by Thursday, the number climbing to 90. Iranian state broadcaster IRIB reported explosions rolling through cities across the country's south. Eyewitness video geolocated by international news teams showed smoke pouring out of a port in Kuhestak, in Iran's Hormozgan province, one of several sites hit in a single coordinated wave. But it's what got hit roughly 900 miles away from the strait that turned this into something else entirely. A U.S. cruise missile struck a bridge in Akala County in Iran's northeastern Golestan province, according to the IRGC unit stationed there. That bridge sits on the exact route between Tehran and Mashhad, the road officials were using to transport the body of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader killed in the war's opening strikes back in February, whose burial was scheduled for Thursday in Mashhad. Iran's foreign ministry didn't just call this an attack on military infrastructure. It called it a grave war crime, insisting the strikes had deliberately targeted civilian infrastructure, specifically naming 2 railway bridges. Central Command, in its own statement describing the 90 targets it had struck, made no mention of any bridge at all. 2 governments, 2 completely different descriptions of the same 24 hours, and no independent confirmation yet of which version is closer to what actually happened on that stretch of road. And then there's Bushehr, Iran's only operational nuclear power plant, a facility that has been treated for years by the international community as a uniquely sensitive site, precisely because any strike anywhere near an active nuclear reactor carries risks that go far beyond a normal military target. A local Iranian official told the state-run IRNA news agency that a U.S. strike hit the plant's perimeter, one of several strikes reported around 4:30 in the morning Eastern Time, hours after Central Command had already announced its attacks on Iran had ended for the night. Whether this was a deliberate expansion of the target list, a continuation that simply hadn't been publicly announced yet, or something else entirely, is not something either government has clarified. What's clear is that, for the first time in this 5-month war, a strike was reported at the edge of a nuclear facility. And that detail alone is the kind of thing that reshapes how seriously the rest of the world is now watching this conflict. For context, international monitors have spent years pushing both Israel and the United States to avoid any strike near an active reactor. Not because of the military value of the site itself, but because of what could happen if a strike went even slightly wrong. Nuclear safety officials have long warned that damage to containment structures, cooling systems, or spent fuel storage at an operational plant could release radioactive material well beyond the immediate blast zone, turning a conventional military strike into an environmental and public health crisis that doesn't respect borders. That's the backdrop against which a single line in a local Iranian news report, a strike near the perimeter of Bushehr, has to be read. It doesn't take a direct hit on a reactor core to make headlines around the world. It just takes being close enough that the question can no longer be avoided. Trump's own language throughout this stretch has shifted noticeably from where it stood even a month ago. Speaking to reporters, he described Iran's leadership as scum, called them sick people, said flatly that they're sort of crazy and a little bit out of control. It's a striking reversal from just weeks earlier, when he'd called the same government smart, very rational and nice to deal with, right around the time the ceasefire was first signed. When a reporter asked him directly why Iran would attack commercial ships in the middle of an active ceasefire, his answer wasn't strategic analysis, it was almost dismissive. Because they're sort of crazy, to be honest with you. And yet in the same breath, he insisted Iran still wanted a deal badly, that they'd called him not long before, that the problem wasn't willingness, it was whether they could be trusted to actually honor whatever they signed. According to a U.S. official familiar with the internal discussions, part of what pushed Trump toward ordering this new round of strikes wasn't just the attacks themselves. It was the timing. Iran hit the tankers while Trump was standing at the NATO summit in Turkey, meeting face-to-face with allied leaders on one of the year's biggest diplomatic stages. The official said that timing specifically irked the president, landing as a kind of public embarrassment layered on top of a military provocation. There's also, according to that same official, a deeper frustration building underneath all of this, one that goes beyond any single tanker strike. Trump is reportedly losing patience with the pace of the broader nuclear negotiations, believing Iran has been slow-walking Washington on the actual substance of a long-term deal, using the ceasefire as cover to buy time rather than as a genuine step toward ending things. Iran, for its part, isn't accepting any framing where it's the side that broke the agreement. Its foreign ministry spokesman posted publicly that the Memorandum of Understanding signed last month explicitly gives Iran the authority to determine arrangements for ships transiting the strait, and accused the United States of violating that exact clause through what he called unilateral actions and aggressive attacks. Iran, he wrote, will steadfastly pursue the protection of its national interests and the exercise of its sovereignty. Underneath the diplomatic language, that's a government saying it doesn't see itself as the party that escalated first, regardless of how Washington is presenting the sequence of events. The retaliation didn't stay contained to Iran and the Strait either. Kuwait's armed forces reported intercepting 2 ballistic missiles and 13 hostile drones, all successfully shot down with no reported damage or injuries. Sirens sounded across Bahrain and Qatar as well, both hosting significant American military infrastructure, both now bracing themselves as this exchange widens beyond the 2 primary combatants. The International Maritime Organization's Secretary General condemned what he called reckless attacks against ships transiting the strait over the past 2 days, warning that innocent seafarers have been placed in grave danger and that the safety of ordinary mariners caught in the middle of this needs to remain everyone's foremost priority, regardless of which flag they're sailing under or which government is currently trading blame. Oil markets responded almost instantly and dramatically. Prices surged more than 6% within hours of Trump's declaration that the ceasefire was over, a jump that rippled through markets far beyond the Gulf, touching fuel prices, shipping insurance, and freight costs across multiple continents within a single trading day. To put that in real terms, a 6% single-day move in crude oil is the kind of swing that typically only happens around confirmed wars, major supply disruptions, or the kind of headline that makes traders assume the worst before waiting for confirmation. Shipping companies that had cautiously started routing tankers back through the strait after last month's ceasefire now face the same calculation they were making back in March: whether the risk of transiting this waterway at all is worth it, regardless of how much insurers are willing to charge to cover the voyage. Analysts watching this closely aren't offering much reassurance about where it goes from here. Ali Vaez, who directs the Iran project at the International Crisis Group, put it about as bluntly as an analyst typically will in public, saying Trump's pessimism about reaching a final agreement seems well placed, but that doesn't mean the current situation, one with no war fully declared, no lasting agreement signed, and no real peace established, is sustainable either. In other words, the space this conflict is sitting in right now, somewhere between active war and genuine peace, isn't a stable place to remain for long. NATO, meeting in Turkey at the exact moment all of this was unfolding, issued its own formal declaration on the matter, reaffirming what it called the transatlantic bond, and stating explicitly that an attack on one member is an attack on all. The alliance's summit declaration went further, stating that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon, and calling on Tehran to fully respect freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. coming on the same day, a strike was reported near an active Iranian nuclear facility. That language reads very differently than it would have read a week earlier. Trump himself, even while ordering this expanded round of strikes, left the door open, at least rhetorically, for something short of total war. He warned that future military action would get much worse if Iran launched more attacks on shipping, framing the 90 strikes as retribution specifically for the tanker attacks 2 days earlier, rather than as the opening move of a broader offensive. Whether that distinction holds, whether this becomes remembered as the moment the ceasefire quietly died in slow motion, or as one more violent spike in a 5-month pattern that has already proven it can pull back from the edge, is something nobody currently involved seems able to answer with confidence. What's not in question is what happened in the last 24 hours. 90 Iranian targets struck, a bridge on the road to a supreme leader's burial, hit or not hit, depending on whose account you believe. A nuclear plant's perimeter, struck after the operation was already declared finished. And 14 people confirmed dead in a war that both governments are still, even now, refusing to call a war.